Hello and good morning. Rev'd Julie here from St Mark's Church on the last Sunday of my time here as curate at St Mark's. 4 years ago next Friday, I was ordained into the Church of England and I stepped into this new role as assistant curate here at St Mark's Church, Brampton, and also at St Mary and All Saints, the Crooked Spire. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I do remember being excited to step out in faith into the next chapter of life. This is not to say that things have always gone smoothly, but as we reflected last week, it is the storms that can often turn into the best faith-building expeditions. I can honestly say I have no regrets whatsoever. I mention this because in our story today from Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, beginning to read at verse 21, we have two stories of people whose storms turned out to be faith-building expeditions as they also stepped out in faith and found that they had no regrets. I am particularly drawn to these stories in Mark chapter 5 because they show Jesus interacting with first a man and then a woman and then a little girl as individuals in spite of the pressure from the crowds around them and the very many calls on Jesus' time and energy. As I read this story, and I can see within it a model for living as Jesus did, and that we can all follow even today. The model is what I call reaching out and reaching in. First of all then, the reaching out. The man is introduced to us as one of the leaders of the synagogue, and we are given his name, Jairus. So far, so good. But then he does something so out of character and unexpected that it lives on in the memories of those who witnessed it. This eminent man reached out to Jesus. He came to him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, saying, "My little girl is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." His daughter could not come to Jesus. She was terminally ill. And her mother could not come to Jesus. She was caring for her daughter. So it was Jairus who was dispatched to reach out in faith to Jesus, believing he would make all the difference in the world to this family. Reaching out meant Jairus shed any sense of his own power, authority, or dignity, as in front of the crowd, he got down on his knees and publicly begged Jesus to come into his life and into the life of his daughter for good. And Jesus responded with a yes. As Mark puts it, so he, Jesus, went with him, Jairus. Think back to last week's story of the storms. Jairus is in a storm, but now Jesus is in the boat with him. But then the story takes a sudden and dramatic change of direction. Another person, this time a woman, without a name, power, authority, or dignity, she reaches out to Jesus in faith, believing he would make all the difference in the world to her. Her faith was amazing. Having lived with a storm raging for 12 years in the form of chronic illness, it was on this day that she decided to act and to ask Jesus to come into her storm. Her plan is to get close enough to Jesus to touch his cloak and be made well. What courage to push her way through the crowds. What determination to get so close. And then what conviction to come forward and tell her story publicly in front of all those people. As she had reached out to Jesus, so then Jesus reached in to her, affirmed her in her faith, restored her to her community, and then publicly sent her on the way with words of shalom. Go in peace and be healed of your dis-ease. The interruption to Jesus' ministry ends well for her, but at this point it looks for all the world that Jairus' story will not end well. The news reaches him that his daughter has died. Devastating news for any parent, and crushing to these parents who had reached out in faith to the one person they thought could make a difference. Their prayer, their hope, their trust was now all in pieces. But this is when we witness Jesus reaching in. Jesus reaches into Jairus, and I love the detail of Mark's account, which says that overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, Jairus, "Do not fear, only believe." Did you ever have Jesus down as an eavesdropper? Do you ever think that Jesus might be overhearing any of the conversations that you are involved with? Does Jesus hear us when we express our doubts and when we are tempted not to bother him any further? It is in precisely those times that I think Jesus does overhear us and says to us the same as what he said to Jairus. Do not fear, only believe. I heard it put this way earlier in the week. So often we doubt our beliefs and believe our doubts, when God wants us to believe our beliefs and doubt our doubts. And so Jesus reaches into this family, takes the girl by the hand, speaks words of gentle encouragement, and she is restored to them. Their prayers are indeed answered. Jesus has come and laid hands on her, and she is made well and lives. I mentioned earlier that I think these stories provide us with a model for the way that we can live as followers of Jesus, as people prepared and willing to respond to others when they are reaching out to God, by reaching in to them, to walk with them in their distress and anxiety, with prayer and confidence in God, just like Jesus did with Jairus. He went with him. I think Jesus also asks us to slow down in our lives, spiritually and practically, so that we can respond to the needs of another person when we come across them reaching out to God, that we can stop, that we can be okay with the interruption, trusting in God's timing and God's care for us all. And the reason we can do so is because we have absorbed into our lives that life of faith, that deep trust in God that we talked about last week when we find ourselves in the storms of life. Deep trust that is modeled to us by Jesus all the way through his life, his death, and his resurrection. And this deep depth of trust in God is ours for the asking. So as my official time with you draws to a close, along with my heartfelt thanks for the last few years, here are my parting words as we all face the next chapter of our lives. And if you remember nothing else of me, please remember these words of Jesus. Do not fear, only believe. God bless.